May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services. May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl Hawkins, and I would like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now my great privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl now entering the sanctuary. I now present to you one of the sons of Yisrayl from the Bible.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The title of my speech today is The Laws of Yahweh Are Perfect, Converting the Whole Person. You can turn to Genesis 1. It's on page 1. Genesis 1, verse 26. And it says, Then Yahweh said, I will make man in my image, according to my likeness, and they will have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And also, if you can turn over to Genesis 17, it's on page 11. Genesis 17, verse 1, and it says, When Abram was 99 years old, Yahweh appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Almighty Yahweh, walk in my ways and be perfect. Our high priest Yeshua Messiah tells us in Matthew 5, verse 48, Become perfect just as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. If you can turn over to Psalms 19, it's on page 441, Psalms 19, verse 7, and it says, The laws of Yahweh are perfect, converting the whole person. The testimony of Yahweh is sure, making the simple ones wise. And also, if you can turn over to 1 Timothy 1, verse 8, it's on page 933. 1 Timothy 1, verse 8, and it says, We know indeed that the law is perfect if one agrees with the law, taking it to himself to use. And also, if you can go to page 939, 2 Timothy 3, verse 17, and it says, That the man of Yahweh may become perfect, thoroughly furnished for every righteous work. So we can see from the scriptures that the laws of Yahweh are perfect, and by keeping them, we will become perfect like Yahweh. To get a better understanding of this conversion process, let's take a quick look at the genetics. Psalms 139, verse 14, tells us how we are wonderfully made. The human body has trillions of cells. Pastor said our bodies are made up of trillions of micro-kingdoms. The cell is a nucleus. The nucleus controls the cell's activities. In the nucleus of a cell is our DNA. As you may know, our DNA contains our genetic information that makes us who we are. This includes our fixed traits, such as our skin and eye color, as well as our changeable DNA, which determines our character and personality. Yes, this DNA can be changed depending on our behavior. By being taught the laws of Yahweh and practicing them until they become a habit, we are forming our DNA to be in the image of Yahweh. Yeshua Messiah is the first of mankind to become perfect, and we must follow his example. Hebrews 12, verse 2. If you can turn over to Hebrews 12, verse 2, it's on page 951. Hebrews 12, verse 2, and it says, Looking to Yeshua, the first who was led and perfected by the faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the sacrifice, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of Yahweh. We also have the example of our great overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, who was sent in these last days to teach us how to become perfect. In the 10th book of Israel, part 2, page 237, and it's verse 61. It says, "Faith without works is dead." So you've got to not only believe it, but you've got to back it up with the service that the one sent, that's part of it too, tells you to do to become perfect in your life. These two perfect examples became perfect by trusting in Yahweh and keeping all of the 613 laws. We can do the same. 2 Samuel 22, verse 31 and 33 says, "Yahweh, His way is perfect. The laws of Yahweh are without flaw. He is a shield to those who take refuge and trust in Him. It is Yahweh who is my strong refuge and makes my way perfect." And with that, if you all please stand.
It's my great honor and privilege to present to you our first speaker, son of Yisrayl, Shalom Hawkins. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I'm going to be talking about they will turn from their gods and repent. They will turn from their gods and repent. Now if you turn for my first scripture, if you turn to Deuteronomy 30. Now Deuteronomy 30:15 shows that we have a choice. Deuteronomy 30 verse 15. It says, "See, I have set before you this day life by righteousness and death and destruction." Verse 19. "I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you this day, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Because you are free agents to make your own choice between righteousness and evil. Therefore choose life so both you and your children may live." Alright, so he's saying that if you go Yahweh's way, you will get these blessings, that Yahweh will protect you. Alright, but if you go Satan's way, go the way of the gods, then evil like the gods, if you go that way, then you will get these curses. So if we go Yahweh's way and keep His laws, you will be protected. If you turn to Psalms, on page 470, Psalms 91, verse 1, it says, "He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High will abide under the shadow of the Almighty." Verse 14, Yahweh says, "Because you have set your love upon me, I will deliver you, cause you to escape. I will set you on high, because you know my name. You will call me, and I will answer you. I will be with you in trouble. I will deliver you and honor you. With long life I will satisfy you and show you my salvation, Yeshua Messiah." So you see there that if you go Yahweh's way, you will be protected from the things that are going to come to pass. Alright, He will deliver you and honor you and show you His salvation. Alright, so you will be protected. Now if we go Satan's way, we can see what the world has to offer. Alright, now I have a few articles here that I'm going to briefly discuss with you. The first one here, as you can see, it's Pray for Rain. Alright, and it's the Faith Lutheran Church, Pray for Rain. This is in Austin. A group of Austin pastors are asking people to pray and fast for rain. The half dozen pastors are bringing people together for a second time to pray and fast, to ask God to fill Lake Travis and bring rain to Central Texas in the light of the historic drought. Alright, so you can see all the efforts that they're putting in. They're praying and fasting calling upon their gods to bring rain. It says rain represents the presence of God and the favor of God. We can't make it rain. All we could do is ask, humble ourselves, and see if God will come through. All right. Then you have damage estimated in Texas hailstorm pegged at $400 million. $400 million. That's the insurance losses on vehicles, homes, commercial property, and that's what the Insurance Council of Texas reported. It was the second catastrophic hailstorm this Texas in West Texas had experienced in the past 3 years. All right, it's $400 million, the estimated damage. The Arctic, a warming Arctic is losing its ice cover quickly. And if you see this picture here, you can see this is in 1979. You can see how big the ice sheet is. And then in 2011, it has this drastic change right there. So you can see how it went down quickly. The Arctic is warming at least 2 times faster than the rest of our planet. A warming Arctic Ocean of 1.8 degrees has caused the upper atmosphere to change dramatically. That's their own words. It's changing dramatically. And then you have the British coast was battered by 30-foot waves on January the 1st, and they were expecting 50-foot waves. But you can see how the weather is getting messed up. Then they're getting all this damage from the earthquakes, tornadoes, sinkholes, all these different things that the world has to offer you if you go out into the world. In Australia, temperatures reach 120 degrees. That's in South Australia. It's the worst recorded drought ever. And then, the California, currently 85% of California is expecting a severe drought. This is very serious because without water, the nation's leading agricultural producer at $16 billion annually, $16 billion annually, including the world's largest almond crop at $3 billion alone, in dire straits. The drought is predicted to cost farmers at least $1 billion. And then it says, don't be freaked out. You may be drinking recycled toilet water. All right, now they're saying here in this article that in Disneylands and stuff, they've been doing it since 2009. But in D.C., they've been recycling sewage water since the 70s. All right, so this isn't a new thing. They've been doing it for a while now. It says, surprise, you may have been drinking that for years without knowing it. All right, and they say that the water is clean between your toilet and your mouth. According to NPR, it's chlorinated, filtered, and subjected to reverse osmosis. Everything from viruses to pharmaceuticals and all chemicals should be filtered out. All right, so you can see what the world has to offer. And they're calling on their gods for rain, but you could see earlier in 1 Kings that didn't work. If you turn to 1 Kings 18, it's on page 244, 294. 1 Kings 18, verse 21, says, Ilya addressed all the people and said, when will you stop being swayed by 2 separate doctrines? If Yahweh is the mighty one, then follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. So the prophet Ilya gave them a choice, whether they wanted to follow Baal. If Baal was the mighty one, then follow him. But if Yahweh was, then follow him. All right, and then Then they built altars, and they wanted to see if fire would come down to those altars. But so the people, in verse 27, at noon Ilya began mocking them and saying, "Cry louder. Since he is a god, he must be meditating, or busy, or traveling. It may be he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they cried louder and gashed themselves with knives and lances, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. All right, so you can see how much effort they went through. All these things, they were cutting themselves open and stuff just to call upon their God. All right, so you can see that it didn't work there. Nothing occurred when they were doing all that. And then in verse 36, when he was to offer the sacrifice, Ilya the prophet stepped forward and prayed, "Yahweh, the Father of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are the mighty Father in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Yahweh, hear me, so this people may know that you are Yahweh Almighty, and that you turn their hearts, minds, and understanding back again." Then the fire of Yahweh fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and licked up the water that was in the trench. So you can see that when the gods called upon when the people called upon their gods, Yahweh, or the gods didn't answer them, didn't fulfill what they wanted them to do. But when the prophet Ilya called upon Yahweh, the thing came to pass. So you can see that when you call upon the gods, it won't work. If you turn to Isaiah 8, verse 20, Isaiah 8, verse 20. It's on page 535. It says, "To the law and to the prophecy, if they speak not according to this word, is because there is no light in them. And they will pass through it hard pressed and hungry, and it will come to pass when they are hungry, they will be enraged, and curse their king and their gods Elohim, and look upward for help. Then they will look to the earth, and behold trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness." All right, and that's what the earth is in now. That's what the world has to offer you. They're groping in the dark for answers, and then they're going to start cursing their gods because they see that the gods are not going to help them. All right, so stay in Yahweh's house and call upon Yahweh, because your prayers will be answered. And with that, if everyone will please stand. It's a privilege and honor to turn it over to our next speaker, Gert Connery.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Everyone may be seated. Now, continuing along in the news, the first thing that's going to be up, and it's important that everyone understands what this gentleman is saying. And once again, it's about this BRICS banking system, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. It's very important that everyone understands what's taking place with that. And the BRICS itself is an acronym representing those 5 countries, because it's a battle for economic control is what it is. It's a group of countries that no longer want to operate under the IMF or the world banking system. They want to be able to control their own economic ways and values instead of being controlled by what's used as the American dollar. So pay close attention. The man that explains it, he was an assistant treasurer under Ronald Reagan. So keep that in mind when watching it. And notice the word control, because that's what the IMF and the World Bank does through money. Remember, hurt not the oil and the wine. Remember that, and remember what Malachi Martin has said. They're all vying for control. Russia, America, and the Vatican, all vying to come out on top. Then secondly, we brought this before about heroin is becoming a huge problem. Not that it wasn't a problem before, but now it's a huge problem. More Americans now dying from heroin overdoses than traffic accidents. Now keep in mind, they've brought this before Congress, and the answer from Congress is we need to start handing out the antiserum, so when someone overdoses, you can just inject them. So let's start handing it out, and that's what we'll do. Well, why is that taking place? Well, remember, why is the heroin overdoses, why is the heroin becoming part of people's lives? Scientific studies show that it's from painkillers, people becoming addicted to painkillers, and you don't want to hurt the pharmacies, of course, because they're big money. There's big money given to politicians because of that. So notice they don't address the cause of the problem. They don't address the cause at all. The third, President Obama this week spoke at Washington State University. And remember, he's trying to explain and win people, members of Congress over, because Congress has to sign this bill in. Congress has to agree to this Iran deal for it to become law, for it to be represented as a legitimate deal in the United States. And President Obama has clearly said we can either choose diplomacy or war. And that's really what they're looking at, because without this deal, President Obama is even admitting the only other option is to bomb nuclear facilities in Iran, and that will not be taken lightly. Then Russia. This is very important because Russia was recently, they've sanctioned imported meats and fruits from other countries, especially the EU. Watch what they do with all of the food that was sent in from the EU, and they refuse to even send it off to poor nations because they think so little of what's going on with this. Remember, Russia rejects Monsanto, and they rejected the mad cow that came from Europe. They want none of that, and they're actually destroying the food. They won't feed it to anyone, not even their dog. They refuse to do so. Then the EPA, remember that's the Environmental Protection Agency. They're the ones that if you dump chemicals in the water, they will hunt you down and fine you. Well, they recently unplugged, they say accidentally unplugged, ruptured a plug from an old mine and spilt 1 million gallons of poisoned water into a river in Colorado. Now there's arsenic, there's lead and other heavy metals, but the scientists were quickly to come out and say, listen, it will dilute, it will flow on down the river and everything, it'll be back to where we can drink it again. Well, remember, little doses of arsenic over a period of time adds up to a lot. And at no time is drinking arsenic acceptable. So keep in mind and watch how they kind of make it sound not as bad. But if it had been someone else spilling it, it would be horrific. And then information coming out from healthcare providers that the IVs that are stuck into your arm that are controlled by computer devices can actually be hacked, where someone can change your dose as you're actually receiving your treatment. They can be hacked because they tie into the internet. So everything showing tying into the internet can be hacked. Then in New York, we have a problem with Legionnaire's disease. Pay close attention to how this disease is being spread. It comes through the air conditioning units, but it started out with the water systems, and the lady clearly says that our water treatment facilities do not kill this bacteria, therefore it made it through the treatment facilities into the air conditioning systems and was dispersed into the air, breathed in into the lungs, and of course it's just a very deadly form of pneumonia is what Legionnaire's disease is. So once again, watch all these things, because it's little things that Pastor's he's been warning us about for years. And then last but not least, Syria. Turkey has opened up an Air Force base for American Air Force for them to bomb Syrians. Now they're saying, American government is saying that, well, we're only going to bomb those who attack the ones that we've trained. Now remember the articles we brought that show America has spent $550 million and has only trained 60 soldiers. Well, they sent 54 of them out this week, and they were either captured, killed, or still missing. And America is saying that they will bomb anyone who tries to attack those soldiers, even if it's the Syrian army themselves. President Assad has said that anyone who bombs Syria without Damascus' consent is an attack on sovereignty. That's a declaration. That's war. That's war, and America has already started bombing with drones, bombing Syria. Now remember, that's where we were at a few years ago when Russia got involved. Well, Russia is standing up once again saying it's not right. So you have to ask yourself in your mind, it's not a question of when we go to war, it's a question of when we admit that we're already in a war, a very deadly war. At this time, if we could go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, in the news today, we have heroin addiction on the rise, and an interesting reason people are getting addicted to it today. Now, we also have a article on a once beautiful river that turned a nasty orange due to a toxic spill. We're going to talk about more airstrikes taking place in Syria. But first, we're going to start off talking about bricks. And we're not talking here about the bricks that you build with. We're actually talking about an acronym that stands for a couple countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And it's an alliance of these nations that are trying to create their own financial stability outside of the U.S. So interesting article there. Yeah. Well, the President and First Lady just made history as they finished up their second visit to India. President Obama is the first U.S. president to visit the country twice during office, and while there, he became the first president to be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade. But China has been trying to rain on the America's parade in India, warning the country to avoid a, quote, zero-sum trap, which they think is being set by Washington and its allies.
Interesting. Well, China's view is that India is being singled out and even pressured to become a key ally in order to slow China's steady rise in power. In an effort to strengthen its bond with India during the Republic Day parade, China's president expressed China's willingness to, quote, make concerted efforts with India to lift their strategic cooperative partnership oriented to peace and prosperity to a higher level.
So what does this back and forth over India really mean? And is the United States trying to drive a wedge between India and China? Well, in an interview with RT, journalist, professor, and former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy under Ronald Reagan, Mr. Paul Craig Roberts, explains what the U.S. has to lose if India sticks with China.
That's right. According to Mr. Roberts, the United States is very concerned about India's recent trade agreement with Russia and, of course, being a part of BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which we just mentioned, which is an alliance of nations to create their own source of financial stability free from the American dollar, so they can kind of get out from underneath that umbrella there.
Well, Roberts says BRICS is very significant as an economical powerhouse to rival the United States on the world scene for the following reasons. The populations and the landmass of those areas is enormous. And southern China has taken over the lead of economic development from all of the countries, and India has had a good bit of development in professional tradable skills. And so it does have the potential of abandoning the use of the dollar, of leaving the Western financial mechanisms and clearing mechanisms, and this then is a direct threat to the exchange value of the American dollar.
Mr. Roberts continued by saying, so it does have the potential of forming a kind of trade relationship that undermines the ability of the United States to control all the outcomes. Washington is very control-oriented, he said. It has a lot of control because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because of the tendency of the European countries to follow Washington's lead. And so it sees the BRICS as a real challenge to Washington's ability to control outcomes. So it will do whatever it can, that is, the United States will, to break it up.
Now, in the past decades, the U.S. has been very controlling over a lot of these nations through a variety of means, including trade, willingness to import goods, or to allow cheaper goods to be sold in the U.S., as well as more specific issues like controlling foreign aid that goes out. BRICS, however, is creating its own system of trade and financing to help smaller developing nations so they are not reliant on the United States.
Roberts explains it's getting more and more difficult for Washington to see the world as a unipolar place where they call all the shots. And the sanctions currently placed on Russia, Mr. Roberts says, warns all other countries that the same thing can happen to us. We've got to get out of that American system and have our own so that we're not subject to this economic bullying.
Well, we go from looking at the United States' position on world economics to its position on nuclear weapons. Now, in the 1960s, President John F. Kennedy made his historic speech about nuclear disarmament at the American University in Washington, D.C. Just this week, President Obama gave his own speech in the very same place concerning the importance of a nuclear deal with Iran.
But this time, unlike 50 years ago, the president had to defend the deal against criticism, the strongest of which comes from Israel. President Obama gave no compliments to his Israeli counterpart, and in fact, some are suggesting this is the U.S.'s biggest anti-Israel speech to date. Unlike JFK, who had no one to dispute, former president, his ideas at the time, Obama is facing harsh criticism from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
When the nuclear agreement was made, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu boldly said, "What a stunning, historic mistake." But President Obama sees this as his legacy, which he made clear in this speech that he doesn't care what Israel thinks, saying, when the interim deal was announced, critics, the same critics we're hearing from now, calling it a historic mistake, the critics were wrong. The progress of Iran's nuclear program was halted. So he was only making reference there to what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said.
Sure. That's some bold talking there. Also, during his speech, President Obama separated Israel out from the rest of the world, stating that all countries pretty much agree to have this deal in place except for the Israeli government. But at the same time, it was reported that Obama met the Jewish leaders in America and told them that if this deal does not go through, America may be forced to bomb nuclear facilities in Iran. Such a move would certainly cause terror against Israel.
Well, Russia is also continuing to have its own problems with Western countries, including the U.S., Canada, and Europe. While Moscow banned most food imports from Western countries last year in retaliation for sanctions imposed on Russia by the West over its involvement in the crisis in Ukraine, there are complaints that items are still being smuggled into the country and sold to Russians.
Russia is getting tough on the meat imports being smuggled in from these countries in an effort to stop it. Just a few weeks ago, President Putin signed a special decree which states that when these banned foods are found, they will be confiscated and destroyed.
Mikhail Dunin, a representative from the Russian Food Safety Agency, explained what would be done when the illegal meats and other products were found. He said these products will be loaded onto our transport and accompanied by the state inspectors, delivered to the disposal plant, and then will be destroyed by burning.
Not everyone agrees with Putin, though. There's been offers to give this food to the poor, send it to Africa, send it to eastern Ukraine, but to no avail. The president's decree is being carried out.
Well, the FDA is sending out a stern warning to hospitals, alerting them to the possibility of potential hacking to a commonly used medical device, the Hospira Symbic Infusion System. Now, this device is used to deliver medications to patients, and we're talking like antibiotics here, and also painkillers through an IV. Well, in the FDA warning, it states an unauthorized user with malicious intent could access the pump remotely and modify the dosage it delivers.
Oh, that's some scary stuff right there. Experts say that every hospital that has devices connected to the internet are at risk. Now, this isn't an isolated incident, they say, but it's definitely an important warning. The device's manufacturer, Hospira, said it deployed an important update to provide its customers an extra layer of security until the pump is completely off the market in a few months, which was a move that actually already started before this took place.
Well, this latest event comes on the heels of Fiat Chrysler when they made a recall to 1.4 million vehicles due to the vulnerability of their vehicles being hacked, as we showed in one of our previous broadcasts. Right. Now, the FDA says there's no specific attempt that prompted this warning, but said there's a real possibility that this could happen. So before it does, let's go ahead and take the precautions and solve the problem.
Right. According to the latest numbers, more Americans are using heroin than ever. This has gotten Congress's attention and created a movement to create reforms. Between 2008 and 2011, there has been a 232% increase of heroin seizures by the DEA, and currently there are at least 600,000 heroin users in the U.S., and heroin overdose now kills more Americans than traffic accidents.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, this type of drug use was once considered a local problem, but is now being put on the government for help. Experts are now saying locking people up is no longer the answer. They, referring to the drug users, need help. So why are the numbers getting so high? Well, the gateway to this increase is in prescription drugs. And that's why it's covering such a broader array of social classes. It starts with addiction to prescription pills, which becomes too expensive, so they turn to heroin. So for this reason, local law enforcement says they need help, but the federal government doesn't have a solution to this problem.
Well, one of the suggestions that came from Michael Botticelli, White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, he said that family members and first responders be equipped with the antidote to heroin overdose. So, not really work to solve the problem initially, but here's an antidote so that they don't die. It doesn't really change them from continuing to use it, but this will at least keep them from dying.
And interestingly enough, Katan, they note that this increase started with the abuse of prescription drugs. Now, prescriptions have, of course, they have to be written by doctors. Right. So it's interesting to see that this illegal use and the abuse of the drugs started out with the legal use of drugs, again, written by the doctors, kind of getting them hooked almost, and then they took it from there.
Interesting. So apparently the guys on the streets in the dark alleys are not the only drug dealers, seems like. Well, from worthless food to contaminated air, YPN's Larry McGee has our coverage on the reemergence of a rare bacterial disease in the Colorado River made worse this week by the very agency responsible for protecting it. Larry, what do you have for us?
During a time period where the environment is out of control and producing record high temperatures, the heat of summer is often made cool by the modern marvels of ventilation and air conditioning. In the famed South Bronx area of New York, however, the cooling tower of many facilities are under suspicion due to the largest outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the city's history. The towers are suspected of spreading and providing safe haven for the disease, which has taken the lives of 10 citizens and infected at least 100 in the area so far. The towers are scheduled to be analyzed, checked, and cleared for safety within the coming 2 weeks, per instructions from the city's mayor, Bill de Blasio. According to medical experts, the bacteria which produces Legionnaires naturally occurs in places like rivers and lakes and travels through water to treatment plants, where it is not eliminated as effectively as some may suppose. The wayward bacteria makes its way from there into buildings, where it is then capable of infecting and sickening a potential host. Medical practitioners say that the disease is treatable, depending on whether or not a doctor makes certain choices concerning antibiotics. Penicillin, for example, is believed to worsen the disease. Things are continuing to get worse nonetheless, however, where the all-important element of water is concerned, after the EPA spilled 1 million gallons of toxic sludge into a river in southern Colorado. Local residents are voicing concern with regard to the wastewater and the impact it will have on local fishing, which is already suffering due to other forms of abuse. EPA officials have accepted full accountability for the incident, acknowledging that heavy metals like arsenic and cadmium are now circulating throughout the river. Experts such as Ashish Basu say that the implications of this week's spill goes far beyond just the appearance of the river. The Anamesa River runs 12 miles and is a source of drinking water for the towns that are surrounding it. The University of Texas professor says that the heavy metals in the river are dangerous to human life, but proposes that the best option to address the spill is to let the river continue to run its course. For the professor of geochemistry in Arlington, where these sorts of matters are concerned, dilution is the best solution. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Katan had said that with all our technology, the best expert's advice is just go ahead and let it dilute.
Yeah.
Well, Russia's Sergei Lavrov condemned the U.S. airstrikes in Syria. U.S. officials say they're going to give air support to the Syrian rebels that the U.S. trained. U.S. National Security Council spokesman Alistair Baskey said, "We will take the steps necessary to ensure that their forces could successfully carry out their mission."
Speaking anonymously, U.S. officials said that if the Syrian government forces attack the rebel forces, the U.S. will engage the Syrian government forces. Now, this is a much different policy, but falls in line with the U.S.'s view on the Assad regime that, according to Secretary Kerry, who said Assad and Assad regime has lost its legitimacy. Well, the U.S.'s goal, they say, is to train Syrian rebels and to protect them against attacks as part of their strategy to combat ISIS.
Now, it's unsure who exactly that the U.S. will be attacking and defending from the air because, according to U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, it's hard to identify people who meet the criteria of being those who can be trusted. Now, critics of the Obama policy on bombing Syria say that it's a mess on the ground and it's about to get messier.
Sounds like it. Well, the U.S. says it has carried out its first drone attack against ISIS from Turkey, a Turkish Air Force base. This comes 1 month after Ankara gave the U.S. permission to use its air base. Turkey's foreign minister says that the U.S.-Turkey joint battles will soon take place against the Takfiri group. Many are waiting to see the result of U.S.-Turkey cooperation against terrorism, and Syrian authorities say that they consider it a breach of the country's sovereignty if such cooperation leads to airstrikes without prior coordination with Damascus. Well, if these things have got you scratching your head wondering just exactly where our society is headed to next, you don't have to worry anymore. Yisrayl Hawkins and the House of Yahweh has been foretelling these events that mankind is bringing upon himself because of not following the laws written in the Holy Scriptures. But he also brings forth the peaceful solution that you and your family can start to practice now to ensure your safety and health. To find out more, you can contact the House of Yahweh.
And when you do, don't forget to request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Now, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. Now, you can also check out our new website, www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Well, don't go anywhere. Sit tight. Up next, the one authorized to bring forth the true peaceful solution to all the world's problems, Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrayl, Abel Hawkins. Praise Yahweh! Come on, louder, louder, go on. Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. The news is looking great. If you notice the bombing in Syria, the United States, Syria is an ally, of course, of Russia and China. So Russia and China can't sit back, you know. They can't sit back and let this go. If they do, they won't have any allies. They won't trust them. So you see where that puts nuclear war right out in the front face again. Food shortage. They're dumping. Russia's dumping the food from the West
that's being smuggled in. This makes me think, retaliation that you find in the very front of Genesis. Chapter 4, you see this. One person does something, the next person retaliates, then that person retaliates, and there's no end to the wars. And I've seen it here in the house. I've seen it here in Yahweh's house, and terribly disappointed when I see it, because I know we have a peaceful solution, and I know it's not being practiced when I see retaliation take place for something that was done to them. Wake up, I'm talking to you. You're condemning yourself when you do this. You can't follow the Leviathan. You cannot follow the Leviathan. This is part of it. Part of everything you see here is part of the serpent. The retired general. Now here's the answer right here. Retired general calls for revival of concentration camps for those who won't follow the Pope. Well, of course, we don't follow the Pope. This is up in Times Square. Yisrayl Hawkins says there has never been but two religious systems since man was created. And that, of course, is getting a lot of attention because it shows the house of Yahweh and that of the serpent, the house of the serpent, the Leviathan, the Vatican. This one, Yisrayl Hawkins reveals secrets to mankind's existence. He says many preachers don't want known. The Vatican certainly don't want you to know what I'm going to bring you today. But it's beautiful. And in fact, if you'll pay really close attention to all of this, so you can bring it to others later. So you won't even have to say, Yisrayl says, stand up and stick your chest out and say, no, here's what the scriptures say. This is what history says. This secret to mankind's existence, he says, many preachers don't want you to know. That came out 8/7. It's just for the stations that they're showing me here, which is just a few, just for the stations that they're showing me here, that have chosen to run these articles, are reaching a total right now audience of 19,823,000 visitors per day. Per day. Yes. The food, they'd rather dump it than to give it to the poor or give it to anybody. Of course, there's really no caring for the poor. I want to show you this one just to remind you of what we're facing and remind you of how big it is. Vatican signs treaty recognizing state of Palestine. Now, normally you don't see anything from the Vatican. Normally it's the Pope, the Vatican Santa Claus that they push out in front to make these deals, and therefore they can draw back. When you see something that the Vatican, where they actually are reporting, the Vatican has many reporters. This is a huge system that its tentacles reach into all forms of governments, the Supreme Courts, from the JP, as they call them, Justice of the Peace, they call them, up to the Supreme Courts. It reaches all of them. And of course, if you notice the decision on legalizing, as they say, legal, nothing legal about it, but they say it is. And of course, those who they can fool and deceive with these legalizations and say sodomy is okay. Well, of course, there was five Catholics out of 9 people. There was 5 Catholics, 3 Episcopalians, and one or two Episcopalians, which is nothing but Catholics, and then they called the other two Jews, which is nothing but Catholics. That's all. Coptic Catholics. They're all following the same God, which was brought forth by the United States. But this one, if you notice, it says that the Vatican, right out in front, Vatican signs treaty. You don't see any, when dealing with the Catholic Church, with the Vatican, you don't see inside what's going on. The government, the institutions, you go to Washington, you can sit in on what our senators are doing, what our congressmen are doing. You can sit in their offices when they're convening, and you can see them passing these laws, one law after another being argued about and passed, even though the opposition to that law brings forth the harm that this law is going to do. Most of the time they go ahead and pass it because it's written by the majority, and when a Catholic priest appears in an office and says, I have 52,000 people that want this passed, or I have this many thousand people that don't want this law passed, it is swayed by the Vatican. And I want you to understand that. This is a big thing. The Vatican is not a little church like they pretend by putting on the news. They show you these cardinals inside, and they're also holy looking and praying, and they got these upside down swords that they're carrying around like this and saying they're the crosses, and they're dressed in Santa Claus uniforms, red and white. You see, all of them dressed like that, including the Pope. Sometimes he dresses just in the white, but this is for show. It's like the Vatican is nothing but just praying to their gods and praying for you and blessing the poor and kissing the babies. I mean, that's all the Vatican is. They don't show you what is really going on in the Vatican. This is a show to keep your mind off of what is going on with that agency. Agency. That's what I'm going to call it from now on, I think. That agency. Let's see. Vatican signs first treaty with State of Palestine. Israel angered by it. It says Vatican and Palestinian leaders sign historic first legal treaty. Pope Francis meets with, that doesn't make any difference. Pope Francis says divorce can be morally necessary to protect kids. See, this is the church part of it that they're putting out in front. U.S. Lawmakers, Pope Francis, wrong to legitimize Palestinians. Well, it wasn't Pope Francis that did this. You just read it's the Vatican that's doing this, and they're the ones that's controlling the world. They're the ones that is spoken of in Revelations 13, Revelation 17 and 18. Exclusive look at the draft schedule for Pope Francis' U.S. trip this fall. He has all these reporters that's writing about him to make it look like that he is something holy, just, and righteous, when in actual fact, they're changing the laws of Yahweh as Yahweh said they would. Why 4 justices were against the Supreme Court's huge gay marriage decision? They had to make it look like they were arguing in there, to bring this forth, and 4 of them disagreed. So that left a majority of 5, which they knew that was going to be the case. I think it was decided before they ever went in what they would do, like the judges when they have a case. Here they take the lawyers behind the doors, and the case is decided before the trial is ever heard by the jury. Yes, they speak in secret to do these things. This thing that you just saw with the drugs, where heroin is killing so many people, because the doctors are selling them heroin and getting them hooked. Then the prisons put them in prison. The judges put them in prison. Why? Because there's money in the prisons. This helps the judicial system. That's all part of the Vatican. Now, the drugs, the heroin, the pharmaceuticals, that's part of the Vatican. They get their cut out of every drug sold. Yes, that's the fact. And if you'll read the 9th chapter of of Revelations, you will see that they still won't repent of their pharmaceuticals. That's one of it. Well, you sell the heroin first. Then you say, well, now they're trying to pass a law where they can sell an antidote to the heroin. Well, see, you've got two sales here. You've doubled your money if you can get this law passed. And they'll get it passed. The only one that I can see that is actually with a true answer, a right answer, was Barack Obama. When he says, it's not right to be putting these people in prison. It's not right to be selling these drugs. And what we need is proper education for the people and the doctors that's selling them the drugs. That's Barack Obama. Well, that's what we need is a peaceful solution. And he's the only one that's pushing that forward. And this is what I'm bringing out. None of these things that the Vatican is passing right now is going to help any at all as far as solving that problem. Their problem is they're not making enough money, so it's going to solve that problem. It's going to make them more money to what they call it here recently when they're taking all this money and putting it in banks somewhere else and hiding it and laundering it and so forth. This will help them to get more money to stack up somewhere in holes here and there. Last week, I was reading to you, not last week, I missed last week, week before. I was reading the Real News right now, and it says, Pope Francis, God has instructed me to revise the 10 Commandments. Now, God, of course, that's not Yahweh, and Yahweh is the Creator. Yahweh is in full control, as He shows. And remember in Revelations, the last chapter in Revelations 22, the last 3 verses of that chapter says that the person, any person, Pope, whatever you want to call yourself, Baptist, Methodist, preachers, whoever follows him in this change, you're as guilty as he is. And Yahweh says, eternal life will be taken from you. You're going to be marked as not worthy to receive eternal life. It says it plain. You better read it for yourself, all you preachers that are hearing me out there. The Pope has already changed the commandments. This occurred with Constantine. This was where the Vatican told Constantine. No, Constantine didn't do this on his own. Constantine, history says, was an idiot that the Vatican used like he's used it, like they're using the popes today. And the Vatican chose the 2 gods to replace Yeshua's name. And of course, they replaced the Yahweh's name too in the Holy Scriptures. Do y'all remember so many years ago when I was writing articles for Biblical Archaeology Review? And I was putting articles in the Biblical Archaeology Review, and all the Christian preachers were bitching and raising hell because they were printing my articles, and they wouldn't print theirs. and Biblical Archaeology says, that they felt it was fair to let me have my say and let everyone, freedom of speech. And this is what they came back with them on. But this is many years ago, and I was showing that the Catholic Church was in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, enough study. I had already seen the Dead Sea Scrolls. I saw part of them under glass in 1982 in a museum in Israel. And you could clearly make out the name Yahweh. And everything we read and everything they read, and this was published in Biblical Archaeology, and I brought it out in the Prophetic Word magazine, but it said that there was nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls that would support Christianity. Well, they kept trying to get the Dead Sea Scrolls translated and out to the people. Remember, they had the Book of Yahweh for over 1,500 years, and people were fighting to try to get, arguing, but it wasn't helping. The Catholic Church was in charge, and it took a black plague to wipe out half of the Catholic Church before they had limited their power so the Book of Yahweh could once again be printed. Now, since that Book of Yahweh, since I started advertising and showing this history in the newsletters, of course our people are writing in more and more. It's picking up more and more, but they're demanding the Book of Yahweh. And as a result, our printers can't keep up with it. We're out of books of Yahweh, but we won't be long. We're working at it. But the people are wanting to see the Book of Yahweh now. And this is great, and it's going to get bigger, much bigger. And I would say we're going to sell about 2 billion of those probably before it's over. Like the King James Version, when it finally got back out to the people, it sold like hotcakes. It's still the world's biggest seller. The House of the Book of Yahweh will be very soon. It will be the world's biggest seller, and it will remain so throughout eternity. Yes, the Book of Yahweh. Well, you could see there how much power the Catholic Church had. The Vatican. I'm not talking about Pope Constantine, the idiot that didn't know 2 gods from 1. He couldn't even count to 2. Most of them can't count to 3, but he couldn't even count to 1. And he said, this is the God, and then he gave him 2. That's what an idiot he was. Well, that's what they put out front to do their bidding. If you remember, if you've read anything about the Jesuit priest, the Jesuits was created, the Jesuit organization, it was created as hatchet men to kill and kill and kill. And they had to swear to kill in a certain way, as the great David Yehuda, and that was what I was trying to get him to look up yesterday and couldn't get him on the phone, and then I forgot about it this morning when he called me and said, they said you was just trying to find me. Well, the phones wasn't working yesterday. They were working, but they wasn't working for me and David. But anyway, this Jesuit priesthood, it was invented for the purpose of going and wiping out the enemies of the Vatican. Well, it got big in itself. It's like the ISIS army, or the others that they're calling these armies that they got going now. It got so big that it outweighed the Catholic Church and the Vatican. Well, now, as you can see, they're taking over the Vatican, and they got a Jesuit Santa Claus out here to send forth to tell the people how holy he is, and God is talking to him and telling him to change these commandments. You see, well, they still haven't released, they still haven't translated the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when they were sued, they're actually taken to court, and the priests who were in charge of them, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I brought this all out years ago, they fired the priest. They fired the Catholic priest. But the Catholic priest wouldn't leave. Nobody went in and got them and took them out. They're still there, and they're still keeping hush-hush the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. Well, this shows you the same power that they had over the King James Version before they let it out. Finally let it out. They was forced to by Yahweh himself. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a King James Version. But they don't want the Dead Sea Scrolls put out there to back up the book of Yahweh. It may be that Yahweh intends to make them do it or not, but one thing that is going out right now is the book of Yahweh. Well, here Pope Francis now says he's given command by God. Well, that God is the Vatican, of course. And this Vatican, this is the agency that I want to explain in full this time before stopping. Not today's sermon. There's no way I could cover it in today's sermon. But he's going to revise the Ten Commandments. And the Supreme Court of the earth is going to, and the quartet, is going to fall in line with this. According to Revelations, they're going to support this Vatican in doing this. Now, listen to what it says. Now, remember the history. I want you to remember the history of this system. The Leviathan, the Vatican, in Israel and in Rome. Let's look at Mark and show you what the Savior said here. Mark 7. Even in Yeshua's day, this was a big deal. They started out with building an army. That is, Herod did, the Herodians. They're the ones that had the wealth. I brought this out, the history of it, and showed you that they're the ones that had the wealth that started the roving army that would take in villages and take their men and put them in their armies and kept enlarging their armies till they never could squash Jerusalem and Israel. They kept having trouble. And even Herod, when he had his brother's wife and Yochanan went to him, and he didn't go to him personally, he was just preaching this. And of course, Herod heard of it, and he quickly arrested him and put him in jail. That's what they do today, remember? They try to put him in jail or set him on fire, burn him out. But if they want to squash a preacher, and that preacher doesn't have Yahweh's protection, then he's going to jail. And their prisons are where they get rid of and keep freedom of speech down. See? So that's what's taking place now. Surely anyone can see this. Even in the latest activities of the beastly system here in this country. And at the same time they're pushing down the Ten Commandments of Yahweh, they're bringing up evil like sodomy. And also, you'll see this in this article, adultery, which includes sodomy. They're going to take that commandment totally out, as I'll read you here in just a moment. Well, here in Yochanan Mark, the 7th chapter, and verse 9, he says, "Then he said to them, how well you reject the laws of Yahweh, so that you may keep your own traditions." Now, this was the Savior doing the speaking. You get that? You see that, all of you? He says, even at that time, they were rejecting the laws of Yahweh to bring forth their own personal laws, but also that they'd been handed down. So this had been going on since the days of Nimrod. That's where it started, with the sons of Noah, who survived the flood. That's where it started. The sons of Noah, who turned right back to God worship. And of course, that system of rebellion against Yahweh's laws has been brought down to Yeshua, who's still speaking of it at this time. Look at verse 1, that shows you who they are. This is the Vatican they're speaking of here. Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes. Their lawyers are also mentioned here and in Acts, the 7th chapter. They're lawyers. These are lawyers that turn into judges and go to the Supreme Courts and so forth. Even your Congress, your politician. Many of them are lawyers, and they all go to the Vatican schools to learn their laws. not Yahweh's laws, but the Vatican's laws that the Vatican passes in the United States. And they don't know it yet, but these same laws are in Israel, and they're getting stronger and stronger in the land of Israel. And this thing with the Palestinians is just one tiny step now towards what they intend to take over. And that is, of course, the Temple Mount. They want it, and they want to rebuild that temple in Jerusalem. Well, it failed before because the people were being read the law daily. That's the reason it failed. Every day that law was read. It was a daily oblation to read that law every day. And the people would come for miles. They'd take their vacations in the temple to hear that law read. So they'd say, why is Herod, he's a king. Why is he married? Why has he got his brother's wife there committing adultery with her? And of course, they solved that problem. How did they solve it? They put him in prison. Well, the same law is going on here today. Yeshua came the same way, and notice his teaching that you're doing away with Yahweh's laws. What are they doing here with Pope Francis? They're doing away with Yahweh's laws. But this time they intend to squash Yahweh's laws. His name and his laws, as Revelations 13 shows you, blaspheme the name of Yahweh and the house of Yahweh and the laws of Yahweh shown in Daniel 7. Well, verse 1 shows you Pharisees, Sadducees, certain scribes together to him, having come from Jerusalem. Look at verse 6. Verse 6. He says, He answered and said to them, well has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites. Well, we'll see that prophecy in Isaiah concerning the Vatican. As it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Well, this is, when you see them prancing around, when you see the Pope and the cardinals prancing around in their Santa Claus uniforms and their crosses as represents the sword, by this you will conquer, around in the Vatican, it looks like they're walking around, praying, and they're just so holy there in the Vatican. Who could ever think ill of these people? So they're trusted. Yes, they're trusted. And they actually think now, they're going to be deceived by the whole world. The whole world's going to worship them, whose names are not written in the book of life. Yes. The only ones that's written in the book of life is called to his house. That's a fact. You wouldn't be written there if you wasn't written here. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines commandments of men. He's going to change the commandments of Yahweh to what? To that of the men. For laying aside, they're asking themselves now, why didn't we take the 10 Commandments out of the Bible before we allowed it to be printed? That's what they're screaming at one another. Well, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. Them commandments didn't have to be there. We could have taken all of them out before we allowed King James to authorize it. Before we told King James, you can authorize this now. For laying aside the law of Yahweh, you hold the traditions of men. Commandments of men. He just named it. Commandments of men in verse 7. Then he said to them, how well you reject the laws of Yahweh so that you may keep your own traditions. Now notice here, he speaks of their forefathers. For Moshe said, honor your father and your mother. And he quotes this. Well, I'll show you what they're going to do to that commandment now. Look on down to verse 13. Making the laws of Yahweh of no effect through your tradition, that is your commandments, you have handed down from one generation to another. That's starting with Nimrod, of course. Nimrod, who created Babylon and the Babylonian system, that is the father of Nimrod, Cush created the Nimrod system that created confusion, Babylon, handed down, and many other similar things you do. Yes, many other similar things. Of course, it's being done daily. Look on down to verse 21. Inside the Vatican, you don't see it. You don't see these laws being passed, but they pass the laws in the Vatican. They send their representatives to all the people of all the lands and say, this is what we want done. They take it to the politicians who are theirs to begin with, and inside they pretend that they're making a vote when it's already decided what they're going to do, decided in the Vatican what they were going to do. For from within, out of the heart of man, from the mind proceeds evil. Remember that word evil now. Genesis 3 verse 5. Be like the gods, be evil like the gods. Proceed evil thoughts, adulteries. That word adultery, it includes sodomy. If you look up the word and the meaning of it, the Catholic Church knows this too. That's the reason they want to get rid of it. It includes sodomy, fornication, murders, thefts, lust, wickedness, deceit. Remember that word deceit, because you're going to see a lot of it in the next few lessons that I give you. That word deceit. The Catholic Church is great at this. Malachi Martin said they're the best. They're the best trained in the world. They study this psychology extremely. They study it extremely so they can present lies that makes it sound like they mean something else when they say it or when it's written. Wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, that is a license to sin in communication with this. Remember the word noisome, noisome pestilence. That's what we're seeing in the drugs today, of course, and of course the disease epidemics that boggle the mind to where the person can't think. You know, I've seen people come here, and I try to get them off of marijuana. I try to get them to stop it, but and they claim that they can, but they never do. It seems like once they get hooked on that, there's something missing in the mind, and it keeps them from getting rid of it, even though they know how evil it is. You know, they knew that before they came to that stage, but now they can't think, they can't reason, they can't control their body to where they can actually stop it anymore. And I notice they die early. An evil eye, yes, that's being practiced. It's being taught throughout the world today. Blasphemy, we'll see more of that in Revelation. Remember this system, this agency, it brings forth the blasphemy, pride, foolishness, all evil. All evil. Remember the gods, following the gods of evil, which Revelations 9 says are demons that Satan uses for influence of the people, of which we see in Genesis itself. Let's see, Constantine. Let me get on down here. Modern society. The importance of family in modern society. The Pope spoke about the importance of the family in modern society. Now, what he's speaking of here when he says modern, he's meaning man with man, sodomy. Modern society. That's what he's referring to. It needs to be helped, he says, and strengthened. That is, he wants them to strengthen sin. That's the reason he's wants to wipe out the 10 Commandments, the Vatican, not the Pope. He's their spokesman. The Pope couldn't care less. He's just doing his job because he gets paid for doing his job and he gets to enjoy the riches of the Catholic Church. It needs to be helped, it's strengthened. That is, sin needs to be stronger. Sin needs to be stronger so you won't be keeping your appointments with Yahweh anymore. So you won't be using the name in prayer anymore. That's what he's trying to bring forth. Lest we lose our proper sense of the services which society as a whole provides. And yes, it does come forth from society because that's what is being planted in society's brain, in their mind. If the laws of Yahweh were taught, if the peaceful solution was taught to the doctors and the people, as Barack Obama said, we wouldn't have the drug problem. We wouldn't have the prison problem. We wouldn't be selling another drug to counteract the first drug. But we wouldn't be doubling our money. Now, President Obama, you got to think here, we need some more money in this coffer of the Vatican. You know, you can't teach this peaceful solution. You're going to wipe out our drug problem here. That is our drug money-making machine that we got going. That's what it's all about. Sell them a drug to counteract the drug and you've doubled your profit right there. And that's what the doctors want to do. Barack Obama says your prisons are wrong. They need to be changed. There's innocent people in these prisons that shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be putting these drug addicts in the prison. The doctors is what made them a drug addict. Where did the doctors come from? They're certainly not of Yahweh. You don't see this crap going on in Yahweh's house. And it won't be in the kingdom. She suffered many things from many physicians, Yeshua said. He didn't say physicians healed her, did he? He said she suffered many things from many physicians. Does that ever get through to anybody what Yeshua said? Modern society, they plant this in the people's minds, and of course, modern society does it, and then they say, well, we got to make this legal now. Pope Francis announced, that's his job, to announce what the Vatican said to Christians around the world, everywhere, not just to Christians, but all those they'll influence, Christians around the world, that God called upon him, instructing him to revise the most sacred texts, the Ten Commandments, given to the Israelites by God Himself. No, God didn't give the Ten Commandments. It's God's. The gods are evil, and it's those that the Vatican is following that wants to take away the righteousness of Yahweh. But see, psychology-wise here, you would think that God gave the Ten Commandments. That's what they put in the King James Version. Yahweh said in Genesis 1:26, I will make man in my image. Satan says, has Yahweh said this? In chapter 3. Satan says, has Yahweh said this? He's lying, Satan said. Yeshua said in John 8:44, no, it's Satan that's lying, not Yahweh. And those who will not follow Yahweh, they got the wages of sin. And those who follow this beastly system, their names are taken out of the book of life. That's a fact that's shown in Revelation by the Savior. The last three verses. You follow this system, and I'm here to warn you right now, whether your preacher is telling you, yes, it's okay, or not, you follow this system that they have. The Ten Commandments was changed back in the days of Constantine. They're just making further changes to it so they can increase their amounts of sodomy and harlotry throughout the whole world. Given to the Israelites by God, he says himself, at Mount Sinai, the commandments including instruction for worship and lists several prohibited practices. Pope Francis said Christians around the world are faced with, now he puts it on the obligation on the Christians now. Now you got to get behind me in this. We got to push this. This is what he's saying. This is something that they'll lift their faith and they'll think what they're doing is right. Yes, let's help the Pope. The Lord called me to help the Pope. I'm going to spread this far and wide. This is what he's putting in their mind. Faced with ever-increasing temptations brought on by the evils of modern society, the Pope said that the updated commandments will turn this evil into righteousness. You won't be breaking a commandment anymore, he said. Well, I got news for you. Just because he changed in his book is no sign the book of Yahweh was ever changed. Not at all. It says sin is the breaking of Yahweh's laws. And he says commandments reflect the changing times and include some minor rewording of the existing rules, he said, as well as the addition of 2 new commandments. The 4th commandment, which if he'd look in the book of Yahweh, he'd find out it's the 5th, not the 4th. The 4th commandment is the 7th. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But he's saying the 4th commandment, which advocates that proper respect be shown towards be shown towards one's parents, has been reworded in order to include sodomites. Sodomites, you know, you got 2 men for your parents. Some babies do that today, many of them throughout the world. It's such a mixed up evil world that they don't, and he wants to make out like that changing this commandment now will make this okay. One's parents has been reworded in order to include children raised by same-sex partners. Pope Francis said the 7th commandment, he got that one right, this is the 7th one, prohibiting adultery and, among other things, homosexuality. Now he knows this. They actually know that this commandment includes sodomy. Has been removed entirely, he said. I just took that one out. Don't have to worry about that one anymore. It's gone. Along with the Sabbath, your appointments with the Sabbath. As instructed by God, not Yahweh now, but the evil of the gods. Genesis 3:5. In order to extend God's grace. Wow, don't that sound peachy? The 5th commandment, which replaces prohibition of adultery, forbids all aspects of genetic engineering. Yeah, this is the 5th commandment. It's going to forbid all aspects of genetic engineering and ban the consumption of genetic modified foods. Now, if he can pull this one off, you know, he won't be actually forbidding this to all, but he will be forbidding this to those they want to arrest. If they can pull this off, they had such laws. Remember, in the Crusades, remember they had, if you had a menorah, a 7-lamp lampstand, if you owned one of those and they found out about it, you had a death penalty hanging over you. If you kept the 7th-day Sabbath, and the neighbors, if they saw you, you know, keeping the Sabbath, resting on the 7th-day Sabbath, that was part of the restrictions that they put on, that the Pharisees put on it when they polluted the Sabbath, and they found out you were keeping the Sabbath day, that was a death penalty. They would haul you into court, into their judicial system, as they called it. They would haul you into court, and your neighbors could testify against you. You could not testify on your own. They wouldn't believe anything you said, but you could testify to who your enemies were. They wanted to know your enemies because they wanted to get more testimonies against you. And you could also testify to who your friends were, so they could go out and get them too. Well, if they pass this law, there's no food on earth that I know of right now that's not modified. There's no food. And this is spread throughout the whole earth. India thinks they've got it under control, but they don't. Russia thinks they have it under control, but they don't. Everywhere the wind blows, this is carried. The genetically modified crops all over the world. Wherever the pollen goes, that's where the genetic engineering goes. Everything we have. So if they wanted to test your food and see if they pass this law and they bring it to strictness like they want to, this is what they want to do. If you don't put your trust in Yahweh, you'll be part of this persecution, part of this arrest and trials and imprisonment or even death penalties. They could come into your home. If somebody testified, they could take flour out of your cabinet, out of your bins, sugar, whatever you have in your house, and they'd say, well, this is genetically altered. You're under arrest. Confiscate all your property. This is what they did when people kept the Sabbath. You think they'd do anything less with these laws? Because Constantine passed a law. You can't be like those who keep the Sabbath day. We will keep Sunday. We'll worship these two gods, this one God, and gives them two. And those laws kill trillions. History says trillions of people. If they pass this, they could kill everyone in the world that they don't want alive. And that's what they're trying to do. Forbids all aspects. This is one of the 11. They got 11 commandments now. It's going to be out really, really soon. The Vatican is putting it in stone. They're going to hand it down from Mount Sinai. Their Santa Claus is going to go by and get it on the way to Christmas parties. Deliver it to your house. Forbids all aspects of genetic engineering and bans the consumption of genetic modified foods. This will cover everyone that they want to kill and they want to murder, they want to wipe out. Not that they want everyone to quit eating it. They're going to be eating it themselves. They already are. The Pope had a garden just recently, and it was advertised and was using commercial fertilizers, calling it organic. Lastly, the 11th commandment, this is a new one, disallows personal idolization. What this commandment means, right here, is you cannot, if this law is passed, which they want to make this the law in America, if this law is passed, this means you cannot have Yahweh as your idol. This is not talking about a wooden board that you pray to. It's talking about your own thoughts, your own prayers. You got to pray to who they say. Listen to this very closely. Lastly, the 11th commandment disallows personal idolization, that you can't make an idol on your own. You got to worship the ones they make for you. You must worship the ones that they choose for you to worship. This means you can't worship Yahweh. That's your personal idol. That is glorification of oneself over God. Glorification, if you worship Yahweh, that's your glorification. That's your idol. Your glorification of yourself over Yahweh. You saw what they did to the people who were using the name Yahweh while the House of Yahweh has been in existence in this time period. You saw even more than that. You saw what they tried with the House of Yahweh. if they get these laws passed, which I feel sure they will, you know, the Catholic, the Vatican is the ruler of the kings of the earth. And if they get it passed, they got the world under full control over God. If they could bring this to pass, they'll have you where they can arrest you, they can arrest anyone on the face of the earth, bring them to court with the death penalty attached. A spokesman for the Vatican now. They actually use the word Vatican again. Father Federico Lombardi said the 11 commandments are currently being etched into marble by an Italian sculptor, and upon completion will be unveiled to the world in St. Peter's Square following an internationally televised Mass. So this is going to go out to all the world, internationally televised Mass. This is no joke. They're bringing this about. 11 commandments. To the members of the NATO defense. The NATO defense is just one army that the Vatican actually controls and set up to bring about the Vatican's will. Just one. Study about it. Read about it. This thing is big. It's huge. The Vatican reaches out into all the world. It's not a tiny thing that we're up against here. It's controlling right now the United States. Just turn to Revelations and read that part first before we go into this other. Revelations 13. Look at Revelations 9 first, because you're seeing the quartet here, and that started in verse 6, chapter 6. You're seeing the quartet in action here, and you got to remember this. You know, the way they got this system set up. It makes no difference if a president or a congressman or a senator. You see the way Ron Paul, you know, he writes letters trying to correct the situation. He writes letters exposing the evil that's in our governments in Washington, and he calls it that too. I don't know if his son is bringing forth the same thing. His son is now running for president, but I don't know if he brings forth the same thing. But the fact is they know that it's evil, but they have, you know, just one man. So he's against all these others who the Vatican has under their thumb. And of course, if a person gives in, and apparently Ron Paul didn't, I hope he didn't, but I used to read his letters years ago. I haven't seen one in a long time, but I hope he didn't give in. But the Vatican has enough, like the Supreme Court, if one or two of them, you know, 3 or 4, as many as 4, could say, no, this is evil, I'm not going to vote for it, it would still pass. Well, of course, all 9 of those voted. They objected, they said 4 of them, but they all went ahead and voted for it, for this evil to be changed, for the pushing aside Yahweh and His laws for this tradition of sodomy. If you don't think it's a tradition, read Genesis 23:15. It's brought to all the world. Sodomy. They're like Sodom and Gomorrah. And Yahweh said, the prophet said, if Yahweh hadn't saved a remnant, we would all be agreeing to this. Well, there is a remnant. But here's the drugs now, and the quartet here is shown, and the nuclear war is shown right here, and a third part of man killed by famine and nuclear wars and disease epidemics. And then verse 20, we see here the drug dealing that is going on, the pharmaceuticals, and the people dying from doctors' prescriptions. I think my brother was killed in that manner. because they couldn't find anything wrong with the man, or said they couldn't. And I'm thinking that's the way he died. But Yahweh said he gave him to that curse. Anyway, here you see, he says the first, and verse 20, and the rest of the men who were not killed by these plagues, he named the in and around the great river Euphrates, and the nuclear war here, and plus the famine and disease epidemics. And he said the rest of the men who were not killed by these plagues still would not repent of the works of their hands. Now that's what this is talking about. It's changing Yahweh's laws. That they should not worship demons. You see that? Demons? Demons, if you'd look at chapter 12:9, you'll see that these demons, called demons, they are the gods that actually followed Lucifer, Halil, the wife, Yahweh's wife, as shown in Isaiah 14 and many other places, worship demons. That's the ones that followed them. And they're gods, if you notice, gods of gold and silver and brass. And remember that word brass, because when we look up the word serpent, we see that word serpent actually has in it brass, iron, fetters, and with there you will compare, of course, Daniel's portraying of this beastly system, this fourth beastly system that tears and rips and tramples, kills, murders, and this has been going on now for many, many years. But the brass, the stone, and of wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk, neither did they repent of their murders nor of their sorceries. Murders? What do you call it when they take these babies and very carefully take them and divide the body parts and sell them? I'm so glad that hit the news, because, you know, it shows the lack of love. Remember, Yeshua said in this generation, he said, because iniquity, putting away of the law of Yahweh, which we just got through reading about, putting away that law, that's iniquity. That's what the Pope is doing. That's what the Vatican is doing right now. They're pushing aside the laws. That's called iniquity. Iniquity leads to sin. Iniquity itself is a sin, because you can't change the word of Yahweh. That's a sin to change the word of Yahweh. But putting it aside, when you see that word iniquity, it's pushing that aside so you can bring forth man's laws. But neither did they repent of their murders. It's whether it's a baby or an adult, it makes no difference. It's still murder. Nor of their sorceries. This right here, if you look it up, it's pharmaceuticals. This sorcery, pharmaceuticals, legalized so they can make money off of it, knowing that it's harmful to your health. Of course, doctors who are convicted in their heart write articles telling you, if you have heart trouble and you go to a doctor, he's going to make you worse. The practices of the hospitals will make you worse. Nor of the fornications, that is idolatry. Read the note in your book of Yahweh. But they still won't repent of this. This is the Vatican they're following. Now in Revelations 13, we see here an agency or a beastly system. A beastly system. And he says, and I stood, this is verse 1, I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw this beast rise up out of the sea. We know that Revelations 17, verse 15, shows that this sea is multitudes, nations, and tongues. That's where it rose up out of. He said, Yahweh said in the last days, remember, In the last days I will establish my house in a Babylonian land not yet established. They didn't even know about America at that time. America wasn't even discovered till 1492. Remember? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's a little poem that they say to all the people. They want to get it in your head that Columbus was the first. That's the reason they owned it. That's the reason they established ownership of it. That was for a reason. But the fact is, America was not discovered until that time. And yet Yahweh said it's going to be established in a Babylonian land that's not even known about right now. And lo and behold, it came to pass. Can you figure that one? Now we're talking about a being here that can look down in the future and tell you, he can even look at you and tell you how many hairs you got on your head. He can look at a sparrow and he knows all the sparrows in the world and knows when one of them falls. Now that's Yahweh that wrote this prophecy and wrote the prophecy about his house and wrote this prophecy and shows when this was written in 96. The temple was destroyed 26 years before that. 70 AD, 26 years. And here we are with this beast here, this beastly system being shown here, not in Jerusalem. He took them out of there. He took them beyond Babylon. Remember? And he saw this beastly system rising up with 7 heads and 10 horns. The 7 heads, as we shown in Revelation 17:9, says this is 7 mountains on which the Vatican was established. 10 horns, that's 10 different religions they had at that time. And upon his horns, 10 crowns, authority was given. And upon the heads, the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was similar to a leopard, and his feet were the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. All of this compares, if you look at it, back to Genesis 49, showing the 12 tribes and what they would become. And then you see the dragon. A dragon. This is where it gets complicated, and it gets worse for those who have no understanding. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. Great authority. Now what is he going to do with that authority? Notice. And I saw one of the heads as it were wounded unto death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after. They followed this beast. All the world followed this beast. If you think what a feat that is, to accomplish, this is not a weak system that is set up here. The Vatican, it is the strongest system that Satan could ever devise. And she's working, her and the gods that followed her is working full time trying to use this to destroy mankind and the earth and the heavens that support mankind. And they worship the dragon, which gave power to the beast. You know where the Vatican is getting its power and authority? Not from Yahweh. They're pushing aside Yahweh's authority for the God, the evil gods. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war. So you see, he's right back to the way of Cain. Way of Cain. Way of Cain. Get that in your mind. Back to the way of Cain. We'll see that later. And there was given unto him a mouth, that's the Pope, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to make war, 42 moons. This is the ending of it now. This is the thing that's been the time period that Daniel showed would be broken into pieces, and it's time of activation, and each activation has a set time, and then it's stopped and so forth. That's what's shown in Daniel. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against Yahweh. You can't mention the name Yahweh in the world. People start mentioning the name of Yahweh, and they start turning from evil in any way and saying, you got to keep the 10 Commandments. This power comes down upon you to destroy you. He blasphemes Yahweh. To blaspheme his name, that's what he did. And they took the name out of the book of Yahweh. Remember? Blaspheme his name and his house and those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints, to overcome them, and authority was given unto them over all the tribes and peoples of the earth, languages and nations. Over all of them. You see that? It's complete. It is complete. It's reaching into all nations. Whether the Muslims realize it or not, they're being controlled by this system. Whether Russia or China or them that worship something else, they think, they're still worshiping this evil system that makes war. And they're yielding to it. And now it's going to take advantage of them. As Malachi Martin says, they're going to be pulled in. Well, you could see from today's news, that's what's taking place. And that they won't be able to risk this diplomacy long. They're going to have to give in to war. And of course, they're building for it. And they're making arrangements to where they can start hitting with a blow when they need to. And all who dwell upon the earth will worship him whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb. Of course, those names that are written in the Lamb's book of life. Turn on over to Revelation 17. I think that's enough there. Let's go to Revelations 22. Revelations 22. You're pretty familiar, I know, with everybody is, but we'll cover that in the start of the next week's broadcast. The nuclear wars, we know they're soon. The Vatican is changing the 10 Commandments again. This is not the first time, as Daniel 7 shows, not to promote righteousness, but to promote sin. It's obvious. This should be obvious to everyone. Surely anyone can see that. Changing the laws, bringing curse of death. Look at verse 12, chapter 22 and verse 12. If you notice here, this is Yahshua doing the speaking. Now they took that they took his name out of the King James Version, and they put the name of God's there, as if a God was speaking this to the people. And of course, this God the Pope speaks of is not Yahweh, it's not Yahshua, and if the names were restored like the book of Yahweh shows, then you would readily see that Yahweh has a work, and the Savior, Yahshua Messiah, sits at his right hand bringing forth Yahweh's law. The Levitical priesthood actually disqualified itself and was given years and years to do so, and has brought the world to the brink of destruction at this time. They still control by force the nations, but they don't hold the holy scepter that is shown in Genesis 49. Yahshua qualified for that scepter. He's not been given authority to bring forth the laws of Yahweh except through the house of Yahweh at this time. And of course, that's a meager thing, a really meager thing that Yahweh is doing right now. If he wanted to, he could turn all the world right now, but he doesn't want to. He's letting them play their hand out to show what sin brings, and that his word is absolutely necessary for you to understand and believe. Well, Yahshua here is doing the speaking, and it says, and behold, I come quickly, my reward is with me. I'm the first and the last. Blessed, verse 14, blessed are those who keep His laws. That's Yahweh's law. Not the Pope's laws, not the Vatican's laws, not the changed laws, but His laws, Yahweh's laws. Now, look on over to verse 18. I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man will add to these things, now this is what they're doing, this is what the Vatican is doing. The strange thing is that the whole world is following. The whole world is following this beastly system right now. The only one that is not following is the House of Yahweh. There's two systems, religious systems, in the earth today. The Vatican, which has been in leadership all this time. There's another great prophecy right there. You know, the United States, where the House of Yahweh was prophesied to be. Yahweh even told you, here's a land that doesn't exist, but He says it's going to be the chief of the nations. You'll see that more clearer next week, Yahweh willing. The chief of the nations. There's no doubt, all the nations, everybody agrees that the United States, if you look at it on a map, it's half as big, or maybe not even half as big as China. The whole United States, not even half as big as China. Not half as big as Russia. But it's the chief of the nations. How could you possibly prophesy such a thing for this little land, this little bitty land called the United States? But He says it's going to be the chief of the nations. That's where I'm going to establish my house. It don't exist yet, but it's going to. It's going to be the chief of the nations, and that's where I'm going to establish my house. And lo and behold, every bit of it came to pass. You're in His house right now. You're sitting here in His house right now. If any man will add to these things, Yahweh will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man will take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, which the Vatican is doing, and the whole world's going to follow this, so says the prophecies, Yahweh will take away His part from the book of life. That means He's dead. They're dead. They're not going to ever be given a chance to enter the kingdom. There'll be ashes under the soles of your feet, dust. To dust they will return. Dust shall be their reward. Part of the book of life, and out of the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. All rights from the things that are written in this book belong to you, brethren, because you're the house of Yahweh. But those who change this in any way, their lives, their part to this book of life and all the things that are written in it for you. He says, He who testifies these things says, surely I come quickly. That's us testifying these things, saying, surely Yahshua will come quickly now. Hallelujah, Yahweh, may this be so. Come, Yahshua Messiah. The love of our King, Yahshua Messiah, be with you all. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Now, that's what occurs to those who are changing the laws right now. To everyone. Popes, preachers who follow them, everything. The Vatican had Constantine change the Ten Commandments already. The Vatican chose Sunday for the same reason that they chose December the 25th. They're worshiping that god. December the 25th is the birthday of the sun god Baal. Sunday is in honor of the sun god Baal. Was chosen in honor of the sun god Baal, which means Lord, to be like the gods. Daniel 7, 19 through 25 shows don't keep any more. Don't keep any more appointments with Yahweh. That's where it started. Daniel 7, 19 through 25, where he changed the times, that's the feast days, and the laws of Yahweh. He also blasphemed the Creator's name, which shows this is the same system. The same system, are you listening? Same system that was in Revelations that we just read. If you were caught keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, you had a death penalty on you. You've got to be like the gods. You've got to be evil like the gods. This is what the Vatican is bringing forth. Genesis 3, 1 through 5. Worship of the serpent. Worship of the serpent. Listen closely, everyone, please. Now, the serpent was more subtle. We have here one of the most difficult as well as the most important narratives in the whole book of Yahweh. You get that? Now this is what the scholars say. They've never understood this passage. They've never understood this at all before. The last chapter ended with a short but striking account of the perfection and facility of the first human beings. And this one then opens with an account of their transgressions, degradation, and ruin. That man is in a fallen state, the history of the world, with that of the life and miseries of every human being establishes beyond successful contradiction. But how and by what agency was this brought about? Here is the great mystery. Well, Yahweh willing, next week it won't be. It's a great mystery. It's like so many other mysteries in the Holy Scriptures. The scholars have worked endless hours trying to understand it. It was sealed. They couldn't understand it. But you will, Yahweh willing, the next time I speak, hopefully next week, you will understand it. And this great agency, you'll understand. You just got a glimpse of it so far, but I'll paint you a picture that you can't help but understand. That's ruling this world, ruling this whole world right now. Now, Yahweh has a plan, of course, and his house has already started, as he said. I don't know why anyone should disbelieve that because of just what I brought out. You know, he'd have to have control. Yahweh would have to have control, and he'd have to know things that man didn't. Those things weren't written by the American Indians that came over here fleeing from their lives. The man that saw the caterpillar with my picture on it, I sent news agencies to talk to him, and it's quite interesting. His parents, Forster parents also fled Europe to escape persecution. He's a very interesting man and took a very interesting picture of the caterpillar, which is also shown in prophecy for this time period. But the strange thing about this caterpillar was that he had my picture on it. And the man couldn't understand that, and he's gone to all the news agencies, and he's pushing it big time. He talked to us, sent us the original dates. He talked to our men, and then we contacted him later, and he sent us the original dates, and everything is going well so far. I don't know if Yahweh is going to make a big deal out of this, or just if he's just showing it for his house, but it is in prophecy. I expect these prophecies to start speeding up now, that praise Yahweh, that's what I said too. Because of the power that the Vatican is now holding, and they're going to present their plans just next month now. They're sending their Santa Claus to bring their will about in the United States, not only here, throughout the world. And of course, they've got to wipe out certain ones, as Malachi Martin showed in his book, The Keys of This Blood. The keys of this blood now, remember what that is. It dates back to Genesis 49. And of course, Yahweh gave the Levites, who were the Korites, who were the cousins of Moshe, remember? He said, you want this job? You got it. and he picked the right ones for it. Well, of course, they've brought the world down to this mess that we're living in right now, but not under, their own authority. They had authority, but it was from the gods that they turned to, from Satan, the beastly system, the Leviathan, one called a crocodile, another a hippopotamus. Well, some of them have gone to the Sardic language, and some of them are taking the Vulgate. That won't help you. I mean, you could go to all these books that they got on earth. It won't help you unless if you reject the Savior and His words, then you will never understand this agency that they say, this is a mystery that no one, and they say they're saying among the scholars there's speculations, endless speculation. And one man said, you need to wipe out all these endless speculations. He said, no one is going to understand this, and it makes it worse every time someone tries to explain it. So look forward to some great stuff from Yahweh, maybe next week, maybe the feast, I don't know, whenever He brings it about. May Yahweh bless your understanding. I'll learn this service next to the next leader. I love you!